Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to start with a really stark assessment from UN and human rights reports. It frames the situation in Gaza as not just a humanitarian issue, but as a crisis of human rights, where the heaviest price, the greatest loss, is being paid by women and children.
Okay, let's dive right in. The source material we're looking at, based on recent 2025 reports from the UN and various human rights groups, is, well, it's unequivocal. It describes a widespread scarcity of food that's reached a critical stage. We've moved beyond just hunger and into full-blown famine.
And the scale of this is just staggering. The reports are describing millions of people caught in the middle of this crisis, facing a desperate struggle for survival that just gets more intense with each passing day. But a crisis like this, it never affects everyone equally. The source material really forces us to zoom in on those who are disproportionately affected, the ones who often bear the heaviest burden far from the headlines, the women and children of Gaza.
For pregnant and breastfeeding mothers, the situation is particularly dire. Testimonies in these reports describe an absolutely tragic consequence of severe malnutrition. Many women can no longer produce milk. Just think about that. It severs the most fundamental, most basic lifeline for their newborn infants.
So, what's the alternative when a mother can't produce milk? Formula, right? But the reports highlight a completely impossible situation. Severe shortages and skyrocketing prices have put this basic necessity almost entirely out of reach. It leaves families with no good choices at all.
And this leads directly to a whole cascade of devastating health consequences. Sickness from a lack of clean water and food attacks children whose immune systems are already weakened by malnutrition. Then, when they get sick, they arrive at overwhelmed hospitals that just don't have the basic resources to treat them. The reports literally call it a perfect storm of systemic collapse.
So, how on earth did the situation get so catastrophic? The reports don't just describe the tragedy, they pinpoint its causes. They outline a sequence of events that led to a complete collapse of the systems needed to sustain life.
The sources lay out a pretty clear chain of events. It started with the blockade that severely restricted access to essentials. Then, that was compounded by ongoing military operations that disrupted all the supply chains. And the final result? A total collapse of basic services, cutting off access to food, medicine, and clean water, and creating the conditions for famine.
You know, it's really important to understand what the word famine actually means in this context. It isn't just about hunger. As this definition shows, it's a systemic breakdown in food access, often caused by factors like war and government policies, which are the very elements that the source material points to as drivers of this crisis. Faced with this reality, international bodies have not been silent. The sources we've been examining are filled with these urgent calls for immediate and decisive intervention to stop an even worse catastrophe. The UN and aid agencies on the ground, they've made their core demands crystal clear. And these aren't just suggestions. They're calling them essential steps required to save lives. Immediately end the siege, allow the unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid, and establish a real path toward a lasting peace. The testimonies gathered by human rights organizations frame this in even starker terms. By labeling this situation a picture of war crimes, the sources are basically shifting the whole conversation. It goes from being about aid to being about accountability, arguing that the deliberate starvation of civilians is a grave violation of international law.
So ultimately, all these reports and testimonies, they all come together on one single argument. This is a man-made crisis. And because it's man-made, they argue that there is a profound responsibility for the international community to act, not just to provide relief, but to address the root causes and ensure there's accountability.
And that leaves us with this final, powerful question that the source material really compels us all to consider. When a system that sustains life for millions of people collapses, and the most vulnerable are the ones who pay the highest price, it forces a difficult but absolutely necessary question about accountability on the world stage.